The dinner party was going exactly as Rachel Bennett had planned it. Perfectly coordinated appetizers, wine pairings that made her look sophisticated, and enough subtle name-dropping to remind everyone that she'd married beneath her expectations but was making the best of it. David Bennett sat at the end of their dining table watching his wife hold court with their friends, and felt the familiar sting when she started her favorite topic: his disappointing career. Before we dive into this shocking story, subscribe to the channel so you're always first to know. Hit like if you're ready for the next revelation, and comment where you're watching from: New York, Los Angeles, maybe Chicago. All right, let's continue with David as he endures another evening of his wife's contempt. "I mean, David's been at the same warehouse for 8 years now," Rachel said, her voice carrying that perfect blend of affection and condescension she'd mastered. "Inventory management. It's steady work, I suppose, but there's absolutely no upward mobility. I keep telling him he should look for something with actual growth potential. But you know David, loyal to a fault even when loyalty doesn't pay." Their friends laughed politely, the way people do when someone's being insulted but trying to pass it off as humor. David's childhood friend Marcus shot him a sympathetic look across the table, but David just smiled and took another sip of wine. Marcus was one of the only people at this dinner who knew the truth, and the look on his face clearly said, "How much longer are you going to let her do this?" The answer was, not much longer. But Rachel had no idea that the clock was ticking on her carefully constructed narrative about her underachieving husband. David Bennett had met Rachel Morrison 7 years ago at a mutual friend's party. She'd been beautiful, confident, working in marketing at a prestigious firm, and clearly going places. David had been quiet, unassuming, working at a warehouse in Brooklyn that distributed industrial supplies. On paper, they shouldn't have made sense. But Rachel had been charmed by his intelligence and kindness, and David had been captivated by her ambition and energy. The problem started about 6 months into their marriage, when Rachel's career trajectory stalled. She'd been passed over for a promotion she'd been certain she'd get, and her resentment had slowly shifted from her employer to David. If he'd been more successful, more ambitious, more something, maybe she wouldn't have to work so hard. Maybe she'd be the wife of someone important instead of a woman who had to explain why her husband managed inventory at a warehouse. The mocking had started subtly, little comments about how David's job was fine for now, but not really a career. Then it escalated to comparing him to her friends' husbands, all of whom had impressive titles and salaries. Then it became a regular topic at social gatherings, where Rachel would laugh about David's dead-end job and complete lack of ambition. What Rachel didn't know, what she'd never bothered to ask about because she'd made assumptions based on his job title and workplace, was that David didn't just work at Morrison Industrial Supply. He owned it. David's grandfather had started the company in 1962, building it from a single warehouses into a regional distribution powerhouse that now operated 5 warehouses across the Northeast and generated $47 million in annual revenue. When David's father had died suddenly of a heart attack when David was 25, ownership had passed to David and his mother. His mother, not particularly interested in running a business, had gradually turned over operational control to David while maintaining a 30% ownership stake. David owned 70% of a $47 million company. His annual income from distributions was around $3.2 million, though he paid himself a modest salary of $85,000 as inventory manager to stay grounded and understand every aspect of the business from the ground up. He drove a 10-year-old Honda, lived in a modest apartment in Queens before marrying Rachel, and dressed in jeans and work shirts because that's what you wore in a warehouse. He'd planned to tell Rachel about his ownership after they got engaged, but something had stopped him. Maybe it was the way she'd talked about money, about success, about the importance of marrying someone going somewhere. Maybe it was the way she'd seemed relieved that he had a stable job even if it wasn't impressive, suggesting she was settling for security over ambition. Maybe it was just instinct telling him to wait and see who Rachel really was when she thought he had nothing to offer but a warehouse paycheck. 7 years later, David was grateful he'd listened to that instinct, because Rachel had revealed exactly who she was. Someone who measured worth in job titles and social status, who mocked her husband's supposed lack of ambition while having no idea what he'd actually built, who loved the idea of success but had no respect for the work required to achieve it. The dinner party continued with Rachel holding court, and David counted the ways she'd insulted him just in the past hour. His dead-end job had been mentioned 3 times, his lack of ambition twice, his refusal to network or seek better opportunities once. And the coup de grace? At least he's reliable, even if he'll never be impressive. When their guests finally left around midnight, Rachel kicked off her heels with a satisfied sigh. That went perfectly. Though you could have contributed more to the conversation, David. You just sat there like a bump on a log. I was listening to you tell everyone how disappointing my career is. Didn't want to interrupt. Rachel missed the edge in his voice entirely. Oh, don't be sensitive. Everyone knows warehouse work isn't exactly glamorous. At least you have a job. That's what I always tell people. David might not be ambitious, but he's employed and stable. That counts for something. David set down his wine glass with careful precision. Rachel, do you actually know what I do at Morrison Industrial? You manage inventory. You've told me 1,000,000 times. What else? I don't know. Order supplies, track shipments, whatever inventory managers do. Why? Have you ever asked about the company itself, its history, its ownership, its finances? Rachel looked at him like he was being ridiculous. It's a warehouse, David. What's there to ask? You work there, you get a paycheck. That's the extent of it. Can we not do this tonight? I'm exhausted from hosting. Right. Of course. David stood up and started clearing dishes. Wouldn't want to bore you with details about my dead-end job. See, this is what I mean about being sensitive. You take everything so personally. David said nothing, just continued cleaning up the remnants of a dinner party where his wife had spent 3 hours mocking him to their friends. But as he loaded the dishwasher, he made a decision that had been building for months. It was time for Rachel to learn the truth. Not because he wanted to prove her wrong, though that would be satisfying, but because he needed to see her reaction. Needed to know if she was capable of feeling even a shred of remorse for 7 years of contempt based on completely wrong assumptions. The next morning, David called his friend and lawyer Marcus Chen into the office. Morrison Industrial Supply's executive offices were on the second floor of the main warehouse. Understated but professional. David sat behind the desk his grandfather had built, in the chair his father had died sitting in, and told Marcus what he wanted to do. I want to tell Rachel who really owns the company. But I want to do it in a way that makes it crystal clear how little she actually knows about my life and career. Marcus leaned back, studying his friend. You've been patient for 7 years. What changed? Last night, she told a room full of people that I'm reliable even if I'll never be impressive. She said it while serving a dinner I paid for, in an apartment I pay for, wearing jewelry I bought her. She has no idea that everything she enjoys, everything she thinks makes her better than me, comes from the dead-end job she's been mocking for years. So you want to drop the bomb and watch her realize she's been wrong about everything? I want her to understand that her contempt was based on willful ignorance. She never asked about my work because she'd already decided it wasn't worth knowing about. She made assumptions and built her entire opinion of me on those assumptions. I want her to face what that says about her. This is going to destroy your marriage, you know that. My marriage has been destroyed for years. I've just been too comfortable or too cowardly to acknowledge it. Rachel doesn't love me, Marcus. She tolerates me while feeling superior about it. That's not a marriage worth saving. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, how do you want to do this? Over the next week, David set up what he privately thought of as the reveal. He scheduled a company board meeting for the following Friday, invited Rachel with the explanation that there was a special recognition ceremony he wanted her to attend. He'd never invited her to his workplace before, she'd never expressed interest in visiting, so her immediate suspicion was palpable. Why would I want to come to your warehouse? Rachel asked over dinner. It's important to me. There's a ceremony honoring long-term employees, and I'm receiving recognition for my 8 years. I'd like you to be there. Rachel sighed dramatically. Fine. But I'm not staying long. I have lunch plans with Caroline. It'll only be an hour, 1 o'clock Friday afternoon. That Friday, David wore his usual jeans and Morrison Industrial Supply polo shirt to work. Rachel arrived at 12:50 p.m. wearing designer clothes that screamed, "I'm too good for this place." Her nose slightly wrinkled as she walked through the warehouse floor where workers loaded pallets and organized inventory. God, it smells like diesel and cardboard, she muttered to David. How do you stand this every day? You get used to it. David led her through the warehouse floor, nodding to employees who called out greetings. Rachel didn't notice how many of them looked at her with poorly concealed dislike. Word had gotten around about how she talked about the boss, and warehouse workers were loyal to people who treated them with respect. They climbed the stairs to the executive offices, and Rachel looked around with mild interest. This is nicer than I expected. Still pretty basic, but not terrible. Conference room is this way. David opened the door to reveal not a ceremony but a boardroom with 12 people seated around a polished table. Executives, department heads, the company's CFO, and David's mother, Catherine Bennett, at the head of the table. Rachel stopped short. "What is this? You said there was a ceremony." Catherine Bennett stood, elegant in her 70s, with the kind of presence that came from decades of quiet authority. "There is a ceremony of sorts. Please sit down, Rachel. We need to discuss some important company matters." "I don't understand." Rachel looked at David, confusion replacing her usual condescension. "Why am I here?" "Because you're my wife, and it's time you understood what your husband actually does." David gestured to an empty chair. "Please sit." Rachel sat reluctantly, looking around the table at faces she didn't recognize. Catherine began the meeting with formal precision. "Welcome, everyone, to Morrison Industrial Supply's quarterly board meeting. Before we begin regular business, I want to address a personal matter." She looked directly at Rachel. "Rachel, you've been married to my son for 7 years. In that time, have you ever asked him about the ownership structure of this company?" Rachel's confusion deepened. "Why would I? David manages inventory. He's an employee." "He is the majority owner and CEO," Catherine said simply. "He has been since his father died 13 years ago. David owns 70% of Morrison Industrial Supply. I own 30%. Together, we own a company that generated $47 million in revenue last year. David's personal income from the company is approximately $3.2 million annually." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's face cycled through expressions, confusion, disbelief, calculation, and finally something that might have been horror as she realized what this meant. "That's not possible," Rachel said finally. "David works in the warehouse. He manages inventory. He makes—" She stopped, realizing she didn't actually know what David made because she'd never asked to see a tax return or pay stub. She'd just assumed it was modest warehouse manager wages and never questioned why they lived comfortably on what she thought was just her marketing salary. The CFO, a woman named Patricia Rodriguez, spoke up. "David does work in the warehouse, Mrs. Bennett. He believes in understanding every aspect of the business from the ground up. He pays himself a modest salary of $85,000 as warehouse manager because he believes in being connected to frontline operations. But his actual income comes from ownership distributions. Last year, that was $3.4 million. The year before, $3.1 million. Rachel's face had gone pale. "The apartment, the cars, the all of it, paid for by your husband's income from the company you've been calling a dead-end job for 7 years, Catherine said, her voice carrying an edge that made it clear she'd heard about Rachel's comments. "The jewelry he's bought you? Paid for by the dead-end job. The vacations? The furniture? Your designer clothes? All funded by the company you've been mocking." "I didn't know," Rachel whispered. "You didn't ask," David said quietly. "In 7 years, you never once asked about ownership, about company structure, about anything beyond my job title. You made assumptions and never bothered to verify them." Rachel turned to him, and for the first time David saw something like fear in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me? I was going to tell you before we got married. But I wanted to see who you really were without the influence of money. And what I learned is that you're someone who measures worth by job titles and social status, who mocks her husband for lacking ambition while having no idea what he's actually built. You've spent 7 years feeling superior to me based on complete ignorance. This isn't fair." Rachel's voice rose. "You let me think you deliberately kept this from me. I kept my ownership structure private, which is my right. You assumed I was just a warehouse worker and built 7 years of contempt on that assumption, which is your character flaw. The question isn't why I didn't tell you. The question is why you never asked." Catherine cleared her throat. "David, perhaps Rachel and you should continue this conversation privately. The board has regular business to attend to." David nodded. "Of course. Rachel, my office is next door. After you." Rachel stood on shaking legs and followed David to his private office, a space she'd never seen, never asked to see, never cared enough to visit in 7 years. She sank into the chair across from his desk while David remained standing. "How long were you going to let me humiliate myself?" Rachel asked finally. "How long were you going to keep mocking me without bothering to learn the truth?" David countered. "Rachel, last night you told a room full of people that I'll never be impressive. You said it while wearing a $10,000 necklace I bought you after serving dinner I paid for, in an apartment I provide. You did that not once but repeatedly for years, Every dinner party, every social gathering, every time someone asked about my dead-end job and lack of ambition, because you never corrected me. I shouldn't have to correct you. You should have cared enough about your husband to actually know what he does, who he is, what he's built. But you didn't care, Rachel. You cared about having a narrative that explained why you didn't get the impressive husband you thought you deserved. Rachel's face crumpled, tears starting to fall. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. People expect certain things, certain status markers, and I was your status liability. The embarrassing husband with the warehouse job who made you look like you'd settled for less than you deserved. That's not fair. David pulled out his phone and played a recording, Rachel's voice from a conversation with her sister 2 months ago that David had overheard and recorded. I mean, I love David, but God, could he be any more mediocre? 8 years at the same warehouse making probably $40,000 a year while I'm the one actually making something of myself. Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd married someone with actual ambition. Rachel's face went white. You recorded me? You said it in our living room while I was home. I didn't record you secretly. You just didn't care if I overheard because you didn't think I was worth protecting my feelings around. But Rachel, that's not love. That's contempt. You don't love me. You tolerate me while feeling superior, and the only reason you've stayed is because you didn't realize you were actually married to someone successful. That's not true. I do love you. Do you? Or do you love the lifestyle I provide while resenting the person you thought provided it? Because now that you know I'm actually wealthy and successful, I'm betting your tune is going to change pretty dramatically. Suddenly, I'll be ambitious after all, impressive after all, worthy of respect after all. Not because I changed, but because your knowledge of my bank account changed. Rachel was crying openly now. Please don't do this. I made mistakes, I said stupid things, but I do care about you. Can't we start over? Can't we just... I'll be better. I'll be more supportive. Just give me a chance. David felt something twist in his chest. Not regret exactly, but sadness for what could have been if Rachel had been different. If she'd been capable of loving him for who he was rather than what she thought he had. The problem isn't just what you said, Rachel. It's that you never cared enough to look beyond the surface. In 7 years, you never visited my workplace, never asked substantive questions about my work, never wondered why we lived so comfortably on what you thought was just your salary. You didn't care because you decided I wasn't worth caring about. I'll change. I promise you'll change now that you know I'm wealthy. But Rachel, I'm the same person I was yesterday when you were mocking me to our friends. The same person I was for 7 years while you built your narrative about my disappointing career. The only thing that changed is your knowledge of my bank account, and that's exactly the problem. What are you saying? I'm saying I want a divorce. The words hung in the air like a guillotine finally falling. Rachel stared at him in horror. You can't be serious. Over this? Over some stupid comments I made? Over 7 years of contempt based on willful ignorance? Over you measuring my worth by job title and social status rather than character and achievement? Over you mocking me publicly while privately depending on money you thought came from somewhere else? Rachel, you don't love me. You love your lifestyle and the narrative you've built to justify why you settled for less than you think you deserved. Now that you know the truth, you'd probably love me more, but it would still be for the wrong reasons. No, you can't do this. We're married, we have a life together. We have a life where you've spent 7 years disrespecting me. That's not a life worth keeping. David called his lawyer that evening, not Marcus, who was too close a friend, but a family law attorney named Sharon Wu, who'd been recommended by the company's general counsel. He explained the situation and his desire for immediate separation. This is going to be contentious, Sharon warned. Your wife is going to argue she didn't know about your true income and should get more in the settlement because she was deceived. I have 7 years of her publicly mocking my job and income. I have recordings of her telling people I'm mediocre and unambitious. I have witnesses who will testify to her contempt. She wasn't deceived. She made assumptions and never bothered to verify them. That helps, but David, I need to ask, a judge is going to ask the same thing, because I wanted to see who she really was without money changing the equation. And she showed me. Someone who measures worth in status and money, who mocks her husband for failing to provide the lifestyle she wants, even while unknowingly living on his wealth. That's not someone I want to spend my life with. Fair enough. Let's start with separation papers. Rachel fought the divorce with desperate intensity, cycling through denial, anger, bargaining, and manipulation. She told friends David had been lying to her for years about his income. She claimed he'd deliberately humiliated her in front of the board. She argued she deserved more in the settlement because she'd been emotionally abused by his deception. David's response was simple. He released 7 years of evidence documenting Rachel's contempt, recordings of her mocking him, text messages to friends where she called him mediocre and embarrassing, testimony from dinner party guests about her public comments, the recording where she'd told her sister she wondered what her life would be like if she'd married someone with actual ambition. The evidence painted a clear picture. Rachel had spent 7 years married to a successful man while believing he was unsuccessful, and her treatment of him had been based entirely on that false belief. Now that she knew the truth, she wanted to reconcile, not because she loved him, but because she realized what she'd been mocking all those years was actually exactly what she'd claimed to want. The divorce proceedings became a spectacle in their social circle. Friends divided into camps, some defending Rachel as the victim of David's deception, others recognizing that she'd revealed her true character through years of contemptuous behavior based on her own assumptions. The most damaging testimony came from David's mother, Catherine, during the settlement hearing. She'd sat through Rachel's arguments about being deceived and finally had enough. "Your Honor, my daughter-in-law has claimed she was the victim of deception, but the truth is simpler and more damning. She never cared enough to ask. In 7 years of marriage, Rachel visited my son's workplace exactly once, today when he invited her. She never asked to see his tax returns. She never questioned why they lived so comfortably on what she thought was just her salary. She never wondered about the ownership structure of a company that's been in our family for 60 years. Catherine's voice was steady but cutting. Rachel didn't care about these things because she'd decided my son wasn't worth caring about. She'd decided he was mediocre, unambitious, a disappointment, and she never bothered to verify those assumptions because they fit the narrative she wanted to tell herself about why she'd settled for less than she thought she deserved. She paused, looking directly at Rachel. My son kept his ownership private to see who Rachel really was without money influencing her behavior. And she showed him, someone who measures worth in job titles and status, who publicly mocks her husband for lacking ambition while privately depending on his income, who only discovered respect for him when she learned about his bank account. That's not a wife who was deceived. That's a wife who revealed her true character. The judge, a man in his 50s who'd clearly heard plenty of contentious divorces, nodded slowly. Mrs. Bennett, your argument is that you were deceived about your husband's true income and therefore deserve a larger settlement. But the evidence shows that you spent 7 years treating your husband with contempt based on assumptions you never verified. You mocked his career publicly while benefiting from it privately. And now that you know the truth, you want to reconcile not because you love him, but because you realize you were wrong about his wealth. He closed the file in front of him. This court finds that your treatment of your husband, documented extensively over 7 years, forfeits any claim to additional settlement based on supposed deception. You will receive exactly what New York law mandates for a 7-year marriage with no children. Half of assets accumulated during the marriage, minus assets Mr. Bennett brought into the marriage and kept separate. Rachel's face crumpled, but the apartment, the investments, were purchased with Mr. Bennett's income from a company he owned before meeting you. You have no claim to the company itself or to assets purchased with income from that company before marriage. You'll receive half of joint accounts accumulated during the marriage and half of any jointly owned property. Given that most significant assets were in Mr. Bennett's name alone and purchased with his premarital business income, your settlement will be approximately $200,000. That's nothing. That's not enough to maintain the lifestyle you enjoyed while mocking the husband who provided it? The judge's voice carried an edge. Perhaps this will teach you to actually know your spouse before passing judgment on their worth. The divorce was finalized 4 months after that board meeting. Rachel received her settlement, $200,000 and her personal belongings, and moved out of the apartment she'd never realized her husband owned. She tried to maintain her social standing, but their mutual friends had all heard the recordings and testimony. The narrative had shifted from Rachel's husband disappointed her to Rachel spent 7 years mocking a millionaire without realizing it. David threw himself into work, expanding the company into 2 new markets and increasing revenue by 15% in the year following his divorce. He promoted several longtime employees who'd been undervalued, restructured management to reward loyalty and competence, and implemented profit-sharing programs that made Morrison Industrial Supply one of the best places to work in their industry. 18 months after the divorce, David met someone at an industry conference. Her name was Jennifer Torres. She was a logistics consultant, and their first conversation was about supply chain optimization. She had no idea who owned Morrison Industrial Supply. She just knew they were one of the best-run operations in the region. "Your inventory management is remarkable," Jennifer said over coffee after the conference. "Whoever runs your warehouse operations really knows what they're doing." "I like to think so," David said with a slight smile. "I've been working in warehouses since I was 16. "Really? So you're not just consulting, you actually know the work." "I spent years on the floor before moving into management. My father taught me that you can't understand a business from an office. You have to know how every part works." They dated for 6 months before the subject of David's ownership came up naturally. Jennifer was doing analysis work for a client and mentioned Morrison Industrial Supply as a potential case study. "I'd need to talk to the owner, but from what I've heard, they're pretty private," Jennifer said. "Very private," David agreed. "Though I might be able to arrange a meeting? You think? That would be amazing for my research. I think I can make it happen, given that I own the company." Jennifer stared at him, coffee cup halfway to her mouth. "I'm sorry, what?" David explained his history with the company, his grandfather's founding, his father's death, his decision to work on the warehouse floor despite ownership. Jennifer listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from surprise to thoughtful consideration. "So, when I was talking about optimization strategies for your own company, I was learning from an expert. Your ideas were good. We've already implemented 2 of them. Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I wanted you to know me as David who works in warehouses, not David who owns one. My ex-wife only respected me once she learned about my ownership. You respected me before you knew. That difference matters." Jennifer smiled slowly. "I respect competence and knowledge, not titles or bank accounts. Though I have to admit, this explains why you have surprisingly strong opinions about supply chain management. And why I could afford this restaurant. I was wondering about that. Warehouse work doesn't usually pay for Michelin star dining." They laughed, and David felt something release in his chest that had been tight since Rachel. This was what partnership felt like. Someone who valued him for his knowledge and character first, who would have respected him regardless of his ownership, who saw worth in competence rather than status. 3 years after his divorce from Rachel, David married Jennifer at a small ceremony in the original Morrison Industrial Supply warehouse, the one his grandfather had built in 1962. Company employees attended alongside family and friends, and the whole celebration had a grounded, authentic feel that David's first wedding had lacked. During the reception, Marcus Chen gave a toast that made everyone laugh and wince simultaneously. David's first marriage taught him that hiding your success can reveal someone's true character. Rachel spent 7 years mocking a millionaire without knowing it, which has to be some kind of record for willful ignorance. But David's second marriage is built on something better. Jennifer knew him as a warehouse worker first and an owner second. She valued him for his competence, his knowledge, his character, not his bank account. That's what real partnership looks like. 5 years after the divorce, David ran into Rachel at a charity event. She'd remarried. A man who worked in finance, made good money, had the kind of impressive title she'd always wanted. She looked put together but older, with a brittleness around her eyes that suggested her marriage wasn't everything she'd hoped. "David, I heard you remarried. Congratulations." "Thank you. I heard about your marriage too. I hope you're happy." "I am." But the words sounded hollow. "I've wanted to apologize for how I treated you. I was shallow and status-obsessed, and I said terrible things about you that weren't fair." "They also weren't true," David said gently. "You apologized to the wrong person, Rachel. You should apologize to yourself for wasting 7 years with someone you couldn't respect because you never bothered to actually know them." Do you ever think about what could have been different? If you'd told me from the beginning, every day for the first year, but then I realized that if you'd known from the beginning, I never would have seen who you really were. You would have respected wealth instead of respecting me, and I'd have spent 20 years thinking your love was genuine when it was just financial appreciation. That's harsh. It's honest. Rachel, you're not a bad person. You're just someone who got lost in status and appearances, who measured worth by the wrong metrics. Maybe your new husband is what you always wanted. I hope so. But I hope you learn to value people for who they are rather than what they appear to have. As David walked away to rejoin Jennifer, he felt the last piece of resentment fade. Rachel had taught him important lessons about authenticity, about the danger of people who measure worth in status rather than character, about the importance of being known for who you really were. Those lessons had hurt, but they'd also led him to Jennifer and to a marriage built on genuine partnership rather than assumptions and contempt. The moral of this story is profound and multi-layered. It teaches us that assumptions without verification reveal more about us than about the people we're assuming about. Rachel spent 7 years mocking David based on assumptions she never bothered to verify, revealing her own shallow values and inability to see beyond surface appearances. We learn that contempt based on ignorance is particularly toxic because it combines judgment with willful blindness. Rachel didn't just misunderstand David's career. She actively chose not to know about it because she'd decided he wasn't worth knowing. That choice revealed her character more than any single comment. The story teaches us about the difference between respecting someone for who they are versus respecting their wealth or status. Rachel couldn't respect warehouse manager David, but would have respected owner David. Same person, different perception based solely on wealth. Jennifer respected David's competence and knowledge regardless of ownership, revealing what genuine respect looks like. We see that keeping significant information private can be a test of character, though it's a morally complex choice. David's decision to hide his ownership revealed Rachel's true nature, but it also meant building a marriage on incomplete information. The test was valuable but came at a cost. Most importantly, we learn that measuring people's worth by their job titles and social status is a fundamental character flaw that creates toxic relationships. Rachel's obsession with status and appearances prevented her from seeing the successful person she'd actually married, leaving her feeling superior while being completely wrong. The call to action is clear. Value people for who they are, not what they appear to be. Ask questions, learn about your partner's life, show genuine interest in their work regardless of how impressive the job title sounds. The warehouse worker might own the warehouse, or more importantly, might be an impressive person regardless of ownership. Don't measure worth by status markers like job titles, salaries, or social standing. Those external metrics tell you nothing about someone's character, competence, or actual accomplishments. David was the same impressive person as both warehouse manager and CEO. Only the perception changed. If your partner is successful, love them for who they are rather than what they have. Jennifer would have loved David as a warehouse worker or an owner because she valued his knowledge and character. That's what differentiates genuine love from financial appreciation. Recognize that contempt, especially public contempt, is relationship poison. Rachel's habit of mocking David in social settings wasn't just unkind. It was destructive to their entire relationship and revealed fundamental disrespect that made the marriage unsalvageable. Finally, understand that people who only respect you once they learn about your wealth or status were never respecting you in the first place. They were respecting your bank account. Real respect is based on character, competence, and who someone actually is, not what they have or appear to have. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it touched you, if it made you think about how you measure worth and whether you really know the people you think you know, please share it with someone who needs this message. Subscribe to hear more stories about assumptions revealed, hidden success, and the difference between genuine partnership and status-based relationships. Leave a comment about times you or someone you know made wrong assumptions about someone's career or status. May you value people for who they are rather than what they appear to be. May you ask questions and seek truth rather than making assumptions. May you build relationships on genuine respect rather than status markers. And may you never mock someone's career without knowing the full story, because the warehouse worker might own the company. Remember, when you mock someone's dead-end job without asking questions, you're revealing your own character far more than theirs. And sometimes the truth you didn't bother to discover makes your assumptions look ridiculous.